Breaking. Alarms blared across Moscow's eastern suburbs as shockwaves rolled through the night sky. In just one single coordinated assault, Ukraine's precision drones and long-range missiles slashed through two of Russia's most secretive command centers. One in Balashikha, the other deep inside Kaluga. Flames rose hundreds of feet into the air, radar towers crumbled, and communication lines, the nervous system of Russia's command, went silent. This wasn't just another strike, this was a surgical blackout, a calculated move to blind the very brain of Russia's war machine. Imagine this. The night sky over Balashikha, a quiet, heavily guarded suburb east of Moscow, suddenly lit up with streaks of light. Drones came in from multiple directions, some hugging the treetops to avoid detection, others climbing high before diving straight into their targets. Within seconds, explosions ripped through the district's central intelligence compound, a facility believed to house Russia's satellite coordination and encrypted communication systems. For years, Moscow called it the Eye of the Motherland. Now that eye is gone. Residents awoke to deafening booms, their windows shattered, car alarms screaming into the dark. Videos posted by locals show a blazing inferno stretching across several city blocks. It was like a second sun rising, one witness said. Emergency crews rushed in, but were blocked by military checkpoints. The government issued no statement, but satellite images captured the truth, a blackened crater where Russia's top communication hub once stood. And if that wasn't enough, only minutes later, another strike hit Kaluga, this time targeting the relay systems that linked Russian command centers across western Russia. In less than an hour, Ukraine had managed what NATO analysts once called nearly impossible, a direct hit to Russia's central command architecture. As news spread online, panic took hold. Russian social media erupted with confusion. "Why can't we reach the Defense Ministry hotline?" one user posted, before their account vanished. Others shared clips of long convoys of military vehicles moving aimlessly, lights flickering, radios dead. For a regime built on tight control and rapid communication, this was chaos. Moscow, the heart of command, was deaf, blind, and terrified. Military insiders are whispering that the strike used a combination of newly modified drones and Western-supplied long-range Storm Shadow missiles. Experts believe Ukraine launched them in perfect synchronization from multiple vectors, a tactic designed to overload Russia's already stretched air defenses. Some sources even claim Ukrainian cyber units hacked into Russian radar grids minutes before the attack, forcing false signals that confused their operators. "It was like watching a blind giant swing in the dark," one Western intelligence officer said. They never saw it coming. But this wasn't just about technology. This was strategy months in the making. Ukrainian engineers had been studying Russia's command web for over a year, tracing every relay node, every backup line, every signal tower that connected their forces. Balashikha and Kaluga were the twin nerves that kept Russia's command alive. Take them out, and the entire system collapses into silence. That's exactly what happened. Inside the Kremlin, reports say Putin's generals scrambled to restore order. Encrypted lines to frontline divisions in Bryansk and Belgorod went down. Drone operators in Crimea lost contact with their control stations. Entire battalions suddenly found themselves cut off, no orders, no updates, no coordination. One Ukrainian analyst described it bluntly. "It's like we just unplugged Russia's brain." Footage on Telegram showed soldiers wandering through forests with handheld radios, trying to catch weak signals. Commanders resorted to civilian cell networks, easily intercepted, turning Russia's high-security operations into open books for Ukraine's intelligence units. Within hours, Ukrainian drones struck secondary supply convoys near Oryol, suggesting they already had the latest movement data. The precision was terrifying. And here's the detail that's sending shockwaves through every Russian military office tonight. These weren't random strikes. Ukraine hit two facilities that had been relocated and hidden after earlier attacks. Moscow believed they were untouchable, protected by advanced S-400 systems and electronic jamming domes. Yet those systems failed completely. Analysts suggest one possible reason. The same Western satellites that tracked Russian troop movement during previous offensives may have provided targeting data. It's a chilling demonstration of what coordination between Ukraine's drones and NATO's surveillance networks can achieve. The message couldn't be louder: nowhere in Russia is safe anymore. The panic wasn't just military. In Balashikha, thousands of residents fled their homes as fires raged out of control. Local officials tried to calm the chaos, claiming an industrial incident had caused the explosions, but eyewitnesses knew better. "We saw drones. We heard them before the strikes," one woman told independent media before her post disappeared. By dawn, Russian state TV avoided the topic entirely, airing reruns of patriotic documentaries instead. Silence the kind that screams louder than any siren. Meanwhile, Ukrainian media didn't hold back. Headlines flashed across Kiev's morning broadcasts. Russia's eye has been blinded. Analysts called it a turning point, not for the physical destruction, but for the psychological shock. For the first time, Russia's core command zone, not its border towns, not occupied territories, but the land around its capital, had been breached. A new phase of the war had begun. Think about it. Moscow spent billions to shield itself behind layers of radar, anti-air missiles, and cyber defense units. Yet Ukraine's strike pierced them all in one night. No one, not even Putin's most loyal generals, can explain how it happened. Was it sabotage from within? Was it technology from the West that Russia cannot counter? Or was it something even deeper, the slow unraveling of a system built on fear and lies? The Kremlin's official response was predictable denial. Within hours, state channels claimed no military infrastructure was affected. But satellite imagery from private companies told a different story. Smoldering buildings, collapsed antenna arrays, burned out trucks. Even the air quality readings over Balashikha showed massive spikes, consistent with a fuel explosion. As the smoke thickened over Moscow's suburbs, one thing became clear. This wasn't an isolated event. Ukraine had just opened a new front, not on the battlefield, but in the enemy's mind. And that psychological war might be even more devastating than missiles themselves. Now, the question everyone is asking, how will the Kremlin respond? Can Russia rebuild its command network before another strike hits? Or has Ukraine just found the one weakness that could cripple the entire machine from the inside out? What happens next could change everything. But for now, one undeniable truth remains. Russia's war command has been blinded, and the panic inside Moscow is spreading faster than fire. Stay with us till the end of this video, because what comes next will show you just how deep this shockwave runs. The first explosions over Balashikha were not random. They were the result of a months-long silent preparation, a campaign so secret that even some of Ukraine's closest allies didn't know its full scope until the moment the sky lit up. What happened that night wasn't just a strike. It was the grand unveiling of Ukraine's newest weapon. Intelligence, precision, a hybrid assault that combined real-time satellite data, stealth drones, and electronic warfare to paralyze the very organs of Russia's military control. In the weeks leading up to the attack, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones had been flying missions far beyond the front lines. At first, no one in Moscow noticed. They looked like ordinary commercial UAVs, small, quiet, flying low over forests and rivers, sometimes even mimicking bird flight patterns to evade radar. Each drone carried cameras so advanced they could read license plates from 10 kilometers away. They mapped every antenna, every transmission mast, every patrol route surrounding Balashikha. For months, Ukraine collected thousands of images and coordinates, feeding them into a real-time database powered by NATO's intelligence network. Somewhere in Kyiv, in a dimly lit command room, analysts watched the puzzle come together. The heartbeat of Russia's command network, pulsing in and out of Balashikha and Kaluga. The breakthrough came when intercepted radio chatter revealed that both centers were temporarily running on backup systems after a cyber outage in late September. That tiny window of vulnerability was all Ukraine needed. A senior Ukrainian defense official described it later as a door left open by arrogance. Within 48 hours, the plan was greenlit. The codename? Operation Blind Falcon. According to insiders, the operation involved 3 separate strike waves. The first wave was purely electronic. Ukrainian cyber units targeted the radar systems of Moscow's S-400 and S-500 air defenses, flooding them with thousands of ghost signals. In military terms, they created a radar fog, making it impossible for Russian operators to distinguish real drones from decoys. The second wave came in the form of long-range decoy drones, launched from multiple locations, some even from inside Russia itself, operated by sabotage cells that had infiltrated months earlier. These decoys drew the attention of Russian interceptors, forcing them to fire missiles into empty sky. And then came the third wave, the real strike. 16 precision drones, armed with high-impact thermobaric warheads and guided Storm Shadow missiles modified for extended range. They approached low and fast, skimming treetops, invisible to radar until it was too late. The first impact hit Balashikha's main transmission hub, the tower that linked Moscow's military headquarters with units across the Western Front. Within seconds, communication to several divisions near Belgorod went dead. The second impact struck Kaluga's signal relay, a structure buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete. Ukrainian engineers had used seismic mapping data to pinpoint its exact location. When the missile hit, it didn't just destroy the building, it vaporized the backup lines buried under it. Russia's command structure was split in two, its signals scattered into silence. Inside Russia, the reaction was chaos. Military trucks screeched through the night, sirens blaring, soldiers shouting into radios that no longer worked. Commanders tried to switch to emergency frequencies, but Ukraine had already jammed them. The airwaves became a storm of static. For hours, no one knew who was in charge. It was as if the entire Russian army had suddenly gone blindfolded. Satellite footage from that night shows an eerie pattern, dozens of Russian units frozen in place across a 1,000-mile stretch. Tanks parked along roads, fuel convoys stopped mid-route, helicopters grounded with engines still running. Without guidance from Moscow, field commanders hesitated. One misstep could expose them to ambush. Ukraine knew this hesitation was coming. Within hours of the blackout, Ukrainian artillery began hitting stalled convoys along the Bryansk and Oryol corridors. Precision strikes lit up the highways. Each impact sent shockwaves through the Russian ranks. Soldiers fled their vehicles, abandoning weapons, while Ukrainian drones hunted them from above. One by one, Russia's supply arteries bled out. What made this operation so devastating wasn't just its physical destruction, it was the psychological unraveling that followed. For years, Russian propaganda had painted Moscow as invincible, its command untouchable. But after Balashikha and Kaluga, that myth crumbled. For the first time since the war began, Russian officers realized their own homeland wasn't safe. Their communications, once their strongest asset, had become their greatest weakness. According to leaked intercepts, later obtained by Western intelligence, several Russian commanders in the Western military district refused to take further orders through unsecured lines, fearing that Ukraine could trace or fake their communications. In one recorded exchange, a frustrated officer shouted, "We are talking into the dark, we don't even know who is listening." That single line, more than any explosion, captures the essence of what Ukraine achieved. Fear. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of Balashikha, the full scale of the destruction became clear. The once heavily guarded compound, surrounded by 3 layers of fencing and anti-drone systems, was now a blackened shell. Satellite antennas lay twisted like broken bones. Trucks burned on the roadside, their metal frames warped from the heat. In Kaluga, witnesses described seeing soldiers loading charred equipment onto flatbeds, while helicopters circled overhead in confusion. The Russian Ministry of Defense released a brief statement hours later, calling it an act of sabotage by unidentified drones, avoiding any mention of Ukraine. But everyone knew the truth. Inside Kiev, the reaction was measured: no official statement, no triumphant headlines. Just a simple message from Ukraine's defense ministry posted online. When the light goes out in the aggressor's home, the world becomes a little brighter. It spread like wildfire. The symbolism was too perfect. For years, Russia had sought to blind Ukraine's defenses through electronic warfare, shutting down power grids and communications. Now the tables had turned. As the footage spread, panic erupted across Russia's regional commands. Some units began relocating deeper into rural zones, away from major cities. Others reportedly dismantled radar stations, fearing they'd become targets. In a single night, Ukraine had turned the geography of safety inside out. The heart of Russia, once seen as untouchable, had become a battlefield. Analysts believe the strike was not just tactical, but psychological warfare at its finest. By demonstrating that even Moscow's suburbs were within reach, Ukraine shattered the illusion of control that Putin's regime depended on. Every general, every officer, every soldier now knows, if Ukraine can hit Balashikha, it can hit anywhere. And perhaps that's the most devastating blow of all, not the loss of equipment, not the destroyed buildings, but the fear that nothing is secure. That fear spreads faster than fire. It corrodes loyalty. It erodes confidence. It makes every decision feel like a risk. While Russia scrambled to contain the damage, Ukraine was already one step ahead. Reports indicate new drone activity near Smolensk and Bryansk, suggesting follow-up operations were in motion. Analysts believe these are part of a broader strategy to cripple Russia's communication lines entirely, cutting its army into isolated fragments, incapable of coordinated response. If true, it means the war is entering a terrifying new phase 1 where Ukraine doesn't need to fight on the front lines to win. It can fight inside Russia's own shadows. And that's what terrifies the Kremlin the most. Because this wasn't a one-time operation. This was a message, a demonstration of reach, intelligence, and resolve. Ukraine showed the world that it can hit, hide, and vanish before Russia even knows what happened. But here's the twist: what happened after the strikes wasn't just panic inside the military. Something even more shocking unfolded across Russia's political landscape. Governors began demanding answers, panic spread to Moscow's elites, and deep within the Kremlin, whispers of betrayal began to surface. And what came next, no one in Russia saw coming. Stay with us, because in the next part, we'll uncover how this single strike ignited a chain reaction inside Russia's own power structure, and why it might be the beginning of something far bigger than just another battlefield loss. The morning after the Balashikha and Kaluga strikes, Moscow woke up to silence, the kind that feels unnatural, heavy, suffocating. The official channels said nothing. State television showed reruns of old parades. But behind the walls of the Kremlin, chaos reigned. Lines of communication that once buzzed with orders from generals now pulsed with static. Ministers couldn't reach military districts, governors were demanding answers. And for the first time in years, even Putin himself, the man who built his empire on absolute control, was caught in a blackout. The strikes didn't just destroy infrastructure. They ripped through the illusion of invincibility that had held the Russian state together for 2 decades. Across the corridors of power, panic replaced confidence. Reports leaked that an emergency meeting had been called in the Kremlin's underground command center. The agenda was simple but terrifying. Find out how Ukraine managed to hit what Russia had always claimed was untouchable. Yet no one had a clear answer. The air defense chief blamed electronic interference. The intelligence director insisted there had been an insider leak. The cyber command pointed fingers at NATO satellites. And through it all, one phrase echoed again and again: "We didn't see it coming." That admission alone was catastrophic. Because if the Kremlin's own security networks couldn't detect a swarm of drones approaching its capital's doorstep, what else were they blind to? The myth of control, the foundation of Putin's rule, had been shattered in one night. As investigators scrambled to make sense of the wreckage, the fallout began to spread. In Kaluga, dozens of officers were quietly detained under suspicion of negligence and information leaks. Military police sealed off access roads to the site, confiscating phones, blocking journalists, and even detaining local officials who dared to ask questions. Yet the truth was impossible to contain. Photos and videos still leaked online: charred vehicles, twisted antenna arrays, black smoke stretching into the dawn sky. Within hours, Russian citizens saw what their government refused to admit: the war had reached home. Then came the second blow, not from Ukraine but from within. As communication networks faltered, several regional governors publicly criticized Moscow's defense command, something unheard of in Putin's Russia. The governor of Oryol posted a message that was quickly deleted. If the capital cannot protect its own skies, what hope do the rest of us have? That single sentence spread across Telegram like wildfire. Screenshots flooded the internet. Even with state censors trying to erase it, the damage was irreversible. For the first time, the cracks in Russia's chain of command were visible to everyone. Inside the military, confusion turned to fear. Units near Belgorod and Bryansk, cut off from Moscow's directives, began making independent decisions, rerouting convoys, changing radio frequencies, even retreating from certain positions without authorization. Ukrainian drones caught many of these moves in real time, striking convoys as they tried to reposition. Each hit was not just a tactical victory, but a psychological one. Soldiers began to whisper that Moscow had abandoned them. Desertions increased. One intercepted call revealed a Russian lieutenant shouting, "We are on our own. No command, no fuel, no orders, nothing." Meanwhile, in Moscow's elite circles, a different kind of panic set in. The oligarchs, those who had long funded the Kremlin's war machine, saw the writing on the wall. The blackout wasn't just about lost command signals, it was about lost confidence. Bankers started moving assets abroad. Private jets quietly took off from Vnukovo airport bound for Dubai and Istanbul. Anonymous sources inside Russia's financial sector claimed that over $1 billion left the country within 48 hours after the strikes. To them, this wasn't a war setback, it was the first sign that the system was crumbling from within. And then came the international response, swift, calculated, and devastating for Russia's morale. NATO released a statement calling the event a clear demonstration of Ukraine's precision capabilities. Though they stopped short of confirming involvement, Western officials subtly celebrated the success. Satellite images published by commercial firms clearly showed the destruction, massive craters, burned infrastructure, and entire blocks wiped from existence. CNN, BBC, and Reuters ran the footage side by side with expert commentary, calling it one of the most significant deep strikes in modern warfare. Across Europe and North America, analysts hailed it as proof that Ukraine could now hit anywhere inside Russia without needing manned aircraft. This revelation sent shockwaves through Russian society. Social media filled with terrified posts. Where is safe now? If they can hit Balashikha, they can hit Moscow next. Within hours, the panic evolved into something deeper doubt. Doubt in the government's words, doubt in the military's competence, doubt in the future. Even China, Russia's supposed ally, maintained a telling silence. State-run outlets simply reported that 2 explosions occurred near Moscow, avoiding any reference to Ukraine. Behind closed doors, Chinese analysts questioned whether Russia could still maintain its defensive commitments, and in Belarus, Lukashenko reportedly ordered a full review of his country's own air defense systems, fearing Ukraine's drones could strike there too. The ripple effect was global. Meanwhile, inside Ukraine, the mood was electric but focused. While people celebrated the success, Kyiv's leadership knew this was more than just a military operation. It was psychological warfare, and it had worked perfectly. For years, Russia had bombarded Ukrainian cities, targeting power plants, water systems, and communication lines. Now, Ukraine had returned the favor, not out of revenge, but strategy. By blinding Russia's command, they had made the giant stumble. And in war, hesitation is death. President Zelensky didn't gloat. His message was calm, measured, and chilling. When darkness falls on those who spread it, light returns to those who fight for freedom. It was a statement crafted not for Ukraine's allies, but for Russia's own citizens, a whisper that said, "Your leaders can't protect you anymore." Behind the scenes, Western intelligence agencies were stunned by the precision of the operation. Analysts in Washington and London quietly updated their assessments of Ukraine's strike capabilities. What they saw suggested that Ukraine had mastered a new form of warfare, one that didn't rely on sheer numbers or brute force, but on information, precision, and timing. And in the Kremlin, that realization struck harder than any missile. By the end of the week, signs of internal collapse began to surface. Reports emerged of generals refusing to take responsibility for the communication breakdown. Others were dismissed or reassigned overnight. Security agencies started monitoring their own personnel, afraid of leaks or sabotage. The paranoia was palpable. And when paranoia infects a command structure, collapse is never far behind. In Kaluga, military investigators found fragments of a missile, with serial markings in English, likely part of a modified Storm Shadow system. Though the Kremlin tried to suppress the finding, word spread fast. Russian bloggers loyal to the regime demanded retaliation against NATO, while opposition figures mocked the incompetence of the military. If NATO missiles can hit Kaluga, then maybe NATO is already inside the Kremlin. One viral post read before it was deleted. But by then, the damage was done. It was no longer just about physical destruction. The Balashikha and Kaluga strikes had exposed a terrifying truth. Russia's entire war effort depended on a fragile illusion of control. Once that illusion cracked, everything else followed. Communication, trust, authority. And for a system built on fear, losing control means losing power. What happens next isn't just about Ukraine's next move. It's about how far the Kremlin will go to hide its own weakness. Because when empires begin to fall, they don't crumble quietly, they thrash. They lash out, they consume themselves from the inside. And that's exactly what began to unfold in Moscow, something far more dangerous than any missile strike. Stay with us, because the next chapter reveals how this internal chaos spiraled into arrests, mutiny, and the beginning of a power struggle the Kremlin never saw coming. As the smoke from Balashikha and Kaluga finally began to fade, a darker storm was gathering inside the Kremlin itself. What Ukraine had ignited with its precision strikes wasn't just physical destruction, it was a chain reaction of paranoia, betrayal, and fear that began tearing through the Russian leadership like wildfire. The empire that once prided itself on discipline and control was unraveling in real time, and this time, there was no way to cover it up. But the deeper investigators dug, the more fractures they uncovered, missing security logs, encrypted data wiped from servers, and traces of cyber activity routed through Belarus, and even within Moscow itself. The possibility that Ukrainian intelligence had infiltrated Russia's digital command grid wasn't just alarming, it was terrifying. And in that terror, the system began to eat itself alive. Regional commanders, afraid of being accused of treason, started shutting down communication with Moscow altogether. Reports from the Bryansk front claimed entire divisions refused to transmit coordinates over secure channels, fearing interception. "If we send anything, it will come back to haunt us," one officer reportedly said. The paralysis was complete. Russia's vast military, spread across thousands of kilometers, was suddenly deaf and terrified of speaking. Meanwhile, in the city streets, the panic was no longer hidden. Moscow's elite whispered of a new shadow war within the Kremlin. Not between Russia and Ukraine, but between its own ministries. The FSB blamed the Defense Ministry. The Defense Ministry blamed the Foreign Intelligence Service. And in the middle of it all stood Putin, silent, grim, watching his own empire slip through his fingers. He had built his power on loyalty and fear, but now both were fading fast. Inside luxury compounds, oligarchs began evacuating their families abroad. Dozens of private jets left Moscow in a single night. One flight tracker showed a pattern that no one could deny: a quiet exodus of Russia's richest, fleeing before the storm they knew was coming. Western analysts began calling it the silent surrender, thus coming a lucid revanche. And while Moscow burned with paranoia, Ukraine struck again, not with missiles this time, but with information. In a masterstroke of psychological warfare, Ukrainian intelligence leaked intercepted recordings of Russian commanders panicking during the blackout. In one clip, a senior colonel shouted, "We've lost connection to every unit, tell me what to do." The recording went viral across Russian telegram channels before censors could react. The Kremlin tried to call it fake, but the tone of desperation was unmistakable. That leak was the final blow. It confirmed what millions of Russians had already begun to suspect: their military command wasn't strong. It was broken. And when that kind of fear spreads, it's unstoppable. Soldiers at the front began refusing orders they couldn't verify. Some units even staged small-scale mutinies, refusing to move without direct confirmation from superiors who were now unreachable. One intercepted report described a commander near Kursk locking himself inside a bunker, refusing to open communications out of fear of Ukrainian traps. It sounded absurd, but it was real. Even loyalists began to question the regime. State media anchors, once full of fire and nationalism, suddenly softened their tone. Instead of boasting about victory, they started warning of difficult times ahead. The propaganda machine, the backbone of Putin's image, was hesitating, stumbling, breaking under the weight of its own lies. Then came the whispers of infighting at the highest levels. Some claimed Defense Minister Shoigu offered to resign after being confronted by security chiefs. Others spoke of secret arrests within the general staff. Though unconfirmed, the pattern was undeniable. High-ranking officials were disappearing, one by one. It felt like the days of Stalin had returned, a silent purge unfolding beneath the surface. The international community could see it too. Western media described Russia as a fortress collapsing from within. NATO intelligence sources reported unusual movements near Moscow. Elite Rosgvardia units deployed not toward the front, but around the Kremlin itself. It was a clear sign that the regime wasn't afraid of Ukraine anymore, it was afraid of its own people. In Kaluga, investigators uncovered fragments of an unexploded missile lodged deep underground. What shocked them wasn't the weapon itself, but the fact that their own detection systems had logged nothing: no radar ping, no alert, nothing. It was as if the missile had appeared out of thin air. For a country that prided itself on having the most advanced defense network in the world, that discovery was devastating. And yet, amidst all this turmoil, Ukraine remained silent. No statements, no celebrations. Just one quiet message from an anonymous official. "When you strike the eye, the mind follows." It was a poetic confirmation of what had just unfolded, a psychological decapitation. By the third week after the strikes, Russia's once tight grip on information had fully collapsed. Independent bloggers filled the void, spreading speculation and fear. Some claimed Putin had fled Moscow, others insisted the army was preparing for martial law. Truth and rumor merged into chaos. The Kremlin's silence only fueled it further. Internationally, pressure on Moscow mounted. Western nations, emboldened by Russia's disarray, accelerated their support for Ukraine. New shipments of long-range systems and electronic warfare tools began moving east. The message was clear: the West smelled blood. But perhaps the most significant change came from within Russia itself. For the first time, ordinary citizens started questioning the war out loud. In markets, in cafes, on trains, the fear that had kept them silent for years was cracking. People asked, if they can hit near Moscow, what's next? Why are our sons dying if the government can't protect its own capital? Those were dangerous questions. the kind that can ignite revolutions. By the end of that month, the Kremlin stood on the edge of a cliff, its army scattered, its command blinded, its people restless, and its allies silent. Ukraine hadn't just hit 2 command centers, it had detonated the myth of Russian strength. And as NATO officials quietly observed from afar, one remark from a senior analyst captured it best. Ukraine didn't just attack Russia's command, it attacked its confidence. And that's something no bomb can repair. Now the world watches as Moscow teeters between denial and collapse. Will Putin tighten his grip and drag the country into deeper darkness? Or will this be the spark that finally sets Russia's long-dormant descent ablaze? One thing is certain, this strike will be remembered as the moment the balance of power shifted. The night Ukraine blinded Russia's command was not just another event in this war, it was the opening act of something far bigger, a reckoning that neither the Kremlin nor the world can ignore. And as this story continues to unfold, one question remains for every viewer watching right now. Is this the beginning of the end for Russia's war machine, or just the calm before the ultimate storm? If you've followed this far, don't look away now, because what comes next may rewrite everything we thought we knew about this war. Stay tuned, like, share, and subscribe, because the next chapter of this unfolding collapse is coming soon, and it's going to change everything.